Everyone, and welcome back to Risk Takers and Trailblazers, Women in Insurance podcast. As always, I'm joined by my esteemed and amazing hosts, Jen, Tanya, and Diane. Ladies, it's lovely to see you today. If you have been following our journey, we thank you. If you're new to us, welcome. We discuss many topics, some planned, some not. But today's topic is the new buzzword, if I can call it that, and that's burnout and resilience. It is how we are now going to openly talk about it and not be shamed. And with that, I am thrilled to welcome Dr. Susan Biali Haas, who I have had the honor to be present of one of her speaking engagements last September. And not to steal her thunder, in her own introduction, Dr. Susan speaks passionately as an advocate for identifying burnout, how to help and be more resilient. She's also an author of a book that I highly recommend. Hopefully everyone can see that, called The Resilient Life, as she will touch on that as well. And we'll put a link at the end of our podcast with notes on how to acquire the book. So Susan, please share with us your journey and give us some nuggets that can potentially help our listeners in their personal and professional lives.
Oh, I'd love to do that. I live for that, as you know. So my background is I'm a medical doctor. Originally, I still am a licensed medical doctor, but I currently work full-time in this space of mental health education and burnout prevention and stress reduction, working mostly with organizations, and was brought in to speak to your group of women in leadership, which is, I love speaking to women leaders. So thank you so much for having me here today. And I started out as an emergency medicine resident way back in the days of my medical training. And that is when 2 years into that 5-year program, I experienced severe depression. That's actually what I was diagnosed with. But it wasn't until years later that I came to understand that actually my primary diagnosis was actually severe burnout. And it had been missed. We really didn't know very much about it at all. And we're really, as a society, just coming to truly understand it. So I don't really blame my doctor for that. But I ended up quitting my residency because of that mental health crisis. And I got my license to practice medicine in the community, which I did for 20 years. And that experience, the fact that I had not known or really understood what was going on with me, and really hadn't known either, my doctor didn't even really know like how to help myself other than medication. And so I embarked on what has now become a lifelong journey and mission to understand as deeply as I can, based on the evidence, how we can, as whole humans, strengthen and protect our mental health, and how in our work environments, how we can recognize and identify burnout, how we can protect ourselves from burnout, and also as leaders, how we can help to foster work environments where people really thrive and are able to contribute their maximum impact. So that is really, in a very condensed format, my story.
Can you share, because I find it intriguing, and I know I don't know the signs of burnout, but in your book you talk about it's almost not you that recognized that you were heading down that road to burnout, but a colleague of yours within your residency that called you back. Can you just give the audience a little preface of that?
Oh, for sure. That was the most pivotal moment in my entire life. Whenever I give speaking presentations, I'm usually asked to share my story. And the heart of that story is how one night, after doing a 36-hour shift with zero sleep in the cardiac care unit, I came home and just lay on the floor and just felt so desperate. I had no idea how I was going to continue going. Obviously, that kind of a schedule is just totally unsustainable. And the things that I was witnessing in the front lines, like there was so much that was going on. I was also experiencing some harassment based on my gender, because there were very few female physicians in that program. And the culture was not everybody. There were some great people, but there were some individuals, just unbelievable the things that they said to me. And so as I lay there on the floor that night, I started to think about quitting the ER. And then I started to think about quitting medicine, but I was 11 years into my post-secondary education at that point, and couldn't see how I could possibly make money doing anything else. And I had student debt. And so I got because I was so tired and also depressed and burned out, my thoughts, I couldn't really regulate my thoughts very well. And they started to really spiral down, and to the point where I started to actually think of just quitting the planet that night. And
Mhm.
as I was lying there having those thoughts, the phone rang. And I still am just amazed to this day that in the condition that I was in, that I would even answer the phone, but thankfully I did. And it was another woman from the ER program. Her name is Karen. She actually still works at the ER at Vancouver General Hospital, as far as I know. But she was at the time one of the chief residents. And she'd been keeping an eye out on us, particularly because they had actually lost another female resident um, pretty recently in the program. And so she had seen some subtle changes in me, and she was concerned. So she called to check in on me, asking me how I was. I totally lied to her at first because there was no way I was going to admit what was going on, given the kind of environment I was in and all the stigma around mental health, etc. But she was such an amazing, amazing leader. I didn't even know her that well,
Mhm.
but she just kept me talking. Like, she knew I was lying when I said I was great. And she just kept me talking. And eventually I just relaxed enough to the point that I decided to tell her what was really going on.
Mhm.
And she was amazing. She recommended that I take a stress leave. And she told me, she said, while you're on your leave, I want you to think about who you actually are and what you might really want to do with your life,
Yeah.
because you don't actually have to do this. And that homework that she gave me, it set me on this completely new journey. It probably saved my life. It made me who I am today, doing what I do today. So you never know the impact of just checking in on someone when you have that instinct that you should.
Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah,
I love that, because the question of like, how are you really? How are, like,
Right.
how
Mhm.
really caring about how another individual is
Mhm.
makes such a
Mhm.
big difference.
And
Did
giving me the
you
space.
were you able to, like, coming through it, were you able to look back and then see recognize those building blocks to that burnout or to that crisis? In the time you couldn't, you needed someone else, but could you then look back and say, okay, well, this was a sign, this was a sign, this was a sign?
Yeah. Yeah. In the sense that when I started to learn about what burnout was, because I've been teaching groups and organizations about burnout since 2008. So a really long time already. And so fundamentally, I started by recognizing like what were the symptoms of burnout. There's like 3 cardinal components. But in terms of what actually caused the burnout, I am still learning that. Like last year for International Women's Day, I was invited to speak to a group of female surgeons from across the country. And there was a DEI expert who's also a physician who spoke prior to me, and she was talking about the way that female surgeons, and again, this is based on scientific literature, the way that female surgeons get treated so differently, even by the nursing staff, like less respect, like there's all these things. And
Really?
as I was sitting there getting ready to give my speech and I'm listening to all these things, I'm like, what happened to me? And one of the big drivers of burnout is your workplace community. If there's toxicity, also if there's injustice, those sorts of things. And so at the time, when that time in history, when I went through this, a lot of that was just accepted. Like as a woman, you just had to deal.
Yep.
And you were so lucky to even be there. So you didn't say anything. You just kept going
Yep.
forward, blinders on. And so I am still coming to realize the elements of that environment that I was in that contributed to the burnout, which is quite fascinating.
I think you've hit something which is one of my side notes, which is, and we're going to talk about how does it fit in the workplace, right? And what is burnout? You kind of touched on that, but you've hit on something that I picked up a word in your book, which was the values, right? Aligning values. Like how do we prevent burnout? But I also think, how do we identify it? And I think, again, I still think it's very new. Maybe it's an older word that's been around, but it's just now starting to bubble back up into the workplace. And maybe that's post-COVID, because everyone's kind of shifted their thought process on what work-life balance is like, what a workplace looks like. So I think that's the remnant still of when the world shut down for 2 years, pretty much, right? But everyone's values, I think, or not everyone's, I shouldn't say, some people's values shifted when we went from working in the office, working to home, and now you're telling people to go back to the office.
Yeah.
Right?
Oh, totally. And we know like burnout is 100% a work-related condition. Like for it to be true burnout, there has to be chronic work-related stress. And we know from longstanding research, there are 6 areas of work life that can potentially drive burnout. One of them being the nature of the community, another being injustice and fairness, as I mentioned, and also the values piece. That's the 6th area of work life, that if you're in a context where there's a mismatch between your values and things that are going on at work or the demands of your job. And as you mentioned, during the COVID experience, a lot of us we became much more in touch with our values, or our values shifted. And it's been extraordinary to watch, as someone who's been interested in mental health and burnout for a very long time, to suddenly see this seismic shift in our culture at workplaces where there's so much interest, but there's still a lot of flailing, right? Because it's a lot to like learn and absorb, and a lot that foundationally needs to be changed, both in how we think about work and how we treat ourselves and how we live, but also the way that organizations function.
I can't remember if I read it in your book or something else that you referenced, which was burnout necessarily isn't workload. Burnout, I think, is those things that you've touched, which is your community, your values, and those pressures from your workplace. And how that impacts somebody.
Yes. I mean, workload is the number one issue. Like out of the 6 areas of work life, workload is I don't know if they're particularly ranked in order of impact, but workload is absolutely a driver. In fact, part of the problem right now in this time in history post-COVID is that across all sectors that I work with, every single time I come into an organization, I'm hearing about the workloads. People are having to do more with less. So that is a big driver. And that's an obvious one that everyone can see, like, oh, I've got so much work to do, I'm burning out. But it's very much also these other more subtle and actually, in some ways, more modifiable factors. Like if you feel you have a lack of control, that's a driver. So what can you take control of? And also just when people don't feel recognized and appreciated, that's a huge driver. And that's something that we can easily shift, both in how we let ourselves receive appreciation and also how we create that kind of a culture. And then I talked about like the community dynamics, psychological safety is part of that, for example, then the injustice piece and the values piece. Though that's the framework of, if we want to really, both as leaders and also within work environments, that awareness of all those elements and ways that we can support ourselves and dial into those to strengthen ourselves, but also to strengthen those around us. That's really that holistic understanding of burnout. And of course, how we take care of ourselves too. Like that's also a big part of it. It's a huge part of it, but it's not fundamentally our responsibility to prevent ourselves getting burned out. It's just part of the picture.
Oh, sorry, go ahead, Tim.
No, I was just going to ask, what are the symptoms, or what should we be looking out for burnout, both in our employees and within ourselves as well?
I was just going to ask the exact same question.
Oh, great. Yeah. And that's so important. And I think that's a big part of the education process around this, because people assume all sorts of things about what burnout is. And generally, it's agreed upon by the leading experts in the field that there are 3 fundamental aspects. And this has also been written about by the World Health Organization, which recently added it to the International Classification of Diseases, et cetera. So this is solid. So there are 3 fundamental components. You need all 3 to have true clinical burnout. So the first is emotional exhaustion, which also presents as physical exhaustion. So you're just really, really tired. You have no energy and you have no idea how you're going to get through your day. The second piece is a real personality shift, and that can be really alarming to people, especially if you used to be a really positive go-getter type. And the way that presents is specifically in terms of negativity towards work and at work. So maybe you become a lot more cynical. You're complaining a lot. You feel increasing resentment and irritation, and also depersonalization is part of that piece, where you may no longer feel, for example, if you're customer facing, you may find it hard to connect with them as people and just see them as obstacles that you just need to get out of your office or close out of the Zoom call so that you can just get done with your day. So that shift in how you feel about customers and colleagues is part of that second negativity part. And then the third is decreasing productivity and efficacy. Not surprisingly, like you're working longer and longer, but you just can't seem to get stuff done. But another part of that aspect is with respect to your sense of accomplishment related to your job. So people will often start to lose their confidence or start to question, am I even in the right role? Like, why did I think that this was a fit for me? And I've had a lot of people come to me. I've been executive coaching for quite a long time. And because of my story, a lot of people have come to me for help quitting their jobs or transitioning to another career entirely. And I love it because I get to work with them in their current workplace context. And when we work on all those different things that I've been talking about, and particularly when I'm working with individuals, I particularly focus on what they're doing, what they're thinking, how they're working, are they sleeping, et cetera. And the vast majority of people who hire me to help them quit their jobs do not end up quitting. They're actually in the right place and they reconnect with their sense of purpose and their joy in their jobs. And the problem actually was burnout, and they hadn't realized it.
Amazing.
Based on that, in our short time, and you have lots of resources that again we'll link to, but what would be some of the things that you could help share with our audience to say, taking that thought and saying, oh my God, they've just heard these 3 things of burnout and they've maybe identified with 2 of them, maybe all 3. What are some of the things that you could suggest that they try to do? And I know that in the book, there's some coaching sessions and examples, but what would you suggest to a new listener that comes to you and says, hey, I think I'm on this road? What's some of the quick tips that you could give me?
Sure. So the very first and the most important is to, if you're really not feeling yourself, if you're exhausted, if you see yourself in any of this, go see your doctor first. Because I have a friend, for example, who is feeling totally exhausted, thought for sure she was burned out. Thankfully, her doctor ordered blood tests. It turned out she had iron deficiency anemia. She was a fairly new mom. She had I think a 2-year-old. And so no amount of executive coaching or stress leave would have helped her. Like she needed iron supplementation.
Yeah.
So, and also there can be other conditions that can mimic burnout, like depression. The 2 are very closely related. They often coexist. So it could actually be another mental health condition that's causing you to feel so different and so unwell.
Yeah.
So get yourself diagnosed properly first. And then also, if you have access to any kind of benefits, like counseling benefits and employee assistance program, maybe you don't have that, but your spouse does. I have always made use of those things. Unfortunately, I didn't during residency, but make use of those counseling resources. Don't wait until things are bad. Actually, I said that I have to leave early from this podcast recording. I have to leave shortly before the hour because I actually am meeting with my counselor because I'm going through it's not even that bad, but it's like a complex season that I'm in and I'm navigating some things. And so I was just like, I think it'd be really good to talk to someone objective, to be able to talk things through, to get some support to help me with my mindset around things. And so I have that built in. I also have a coach. So it's really helpful if you can to, even if you're not experiencing burnout, to build in those kinds of supports and perspectives before things get bad. And then also a huge one I would say is that be aware of your own tendencies, like your personality traits that make you so good at what you do, but also can have their shadow side. Like I work with mostly female leaders, and there will be things like being a yes person, where you got to where you are by just saying yes to everything, by having no boundaries, by doing everything everybody wanted.
Yeah.
And so the higher you and more successful you get, the less important your yeses are and the more important your nos become, actually. You sustain your success and also just to perform at your best and to protect yourself. So boundaries, learning not to say yes, watching your tendencies, also perfectionism, being an extra miler, excessive conscientiousness. A huge thing with women is that it seems that the most extraordinary, brilliant women are the ones who are the hardest on themselves in terms of their internal language, imposter syndrome, cutting themselves down, having impossible standards for yourself. So it's so important to become aware of those things. And like I said, maybe get some coaching or even counseling around that, mentorship. In cognitive behavioral therapy, you're learning to how you're thinking about things currently that aren't helpful, better stronger, more truthful ways to think about things, and also your behaviors and how that translates into action. And that way you can learn these skills that then strengthen you so much that when those really hard times hit, your brain, your behaviors, everything, you're already prepped to navigate those.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's been consistent throughout our podcast, right? With people that we've had on, guests that we've had on, talking about the importance of therapy. Right. It's a big one.
Yeah. You touched on one of the notes I had, which was boundaries, which I think is key. And I think when we first all land in our roles, we always want to say yes to everything. And it's really hard to shift that. And again, as women, I think we're predominantly perceived as always going to say yes to a lot of things.
You think? Yeah.
Right? Like it's sad but true. So it's shifting that mindset. So I think that's a key nugget to get to our emerging leaders, new women in the workforces and moving up through the ranks, is it's okay to say no, constructively, of course, right?
It's essential, actually,
for the right reasons and the right things. And as leaders, as we are where we are in our careers, is when we are saying no, that we're also framing it to help mentor and build out the person that we're saying no to, and maybe giving
modeling,
right, and giving the yes job, right? Saying, no, I can't do it, but you know what? Betty over here absolutely could benefit from doing that for you, right? So
exactly
using that as a mentorship type example and role.
Yes, totally. Yes.
How do you differentiate between, so exactly what you were saying there, Helen, like how do you differentiate between the things that you should say no to? So, I agree, early days or when I was younger, I was saying this to a friend of mine the other day, actually, where I was said, I always used to be the I can versus I can't. Like that was literally my mantra. I remember having my kids and like basically being like, we're a family of I can, not I can't. Right. And so like, but lately it's like, there's more, I feel like it's not necessarily an I can't, but how do you differentiate between what you're saying no to isn't the wrong thing? You're putting up a boundary that is healthy and not hindering, because does that make sense?
Oh, 100%. I talk about it all the time, and it's an absolutely essential leadership skill to develop, especially for women, and a great way to create your own framework for this, because you do need guidelines, and that'll help give you strength and clarity and initiative as well in implementing this strategy. And an exercise that I always give to audiences, especially leaders, is to think about, with respect to your work as a leader, what are your top 4 priorities? Like, what are the things that only you can do? What do you need to do to move your business forward? Like, what 4 priorities will determine where you are a year from now, 10 years from now, and get really clear about those. Because as yes people, the way that the current will flow is that if you don't watch out for this, the yeses will let in so many things that you will not have any time to work on those key things, because things like vision, planning, strategy, those are not going to happen if you're just responding to requests. Like, you actually have to carve out time. And so once you've written down your 4 key priorities for your work this year, anytime a request comes in, ask yourself, is this one of my priorities, and how are the priorities doing? Like, if somebody wants my help with something and I could totally help them with it, but I haven't done any strategy work or planning, and I'm feeling really stressed because I know things feel a bit out of control, that will then help give you the confidence and your why for saying no. And you can even leverage that in your language. Like, if someone asks you, say, I really wish I could, but I've not had any time to work on strategy, and I promised myself, I have booked it in my calendar, I'm going to get to that this week. So unfortunately, no, but like you said, Mary over here, I know that she'd actually love to get some experience in that area. And I think she could be really helpful to you, because when we delegate things, if we can identify, and you mentioned this, that if it's something that someone else would actually love to get their hands on or needs experience, and that could be a great way of identifying how to delegate. But it's that understanding about, what do I need to be doing? What am I not doing that I need to be doing? And then using that to guide where you're going to say yes and where you're going to say no. And things get really clear.
Mhm.
Yeah.
That's
Good
great.
advice.
Yeah.
Really good advice.
Yeah.
I read something that said every time you say yes to something, you're saying no to something else.
Yeah, I think it's in my book, right?
And maybe that's where I got it.
Oh no. I mean, can't take credit for it. My sister taught that to me in Brooklyn years ago. She said it to me.
Yeah, so make sure that if you're saying yes to something, you know what you're deviating away from, and
Yeah,
say,
we got to get rid of this magic sense of time. And that's
Mm-hmm.
really what that exercise is trying to do, to really crystallize that if you're saying yes to something, it means you are neglecting something else.
Mhm.
And being very clear about what that transaction is, rather than thinking you have infinite amounts of time and you'll somehow get it all done, because you will not. And it'll be the most important things that get pushed out of the way.
Yeah. There are a couple of things that I still have notes on to chat through. The one thing I want to talk about is we've talked about, identifying some burnout and stress and all of those things, but talk to the girls and the audience about some of the methods you put in your book and that I've experienced firsthand, because you talk about it in your sessions when I was at the women's event, which was the breathing and talking about how you bring yourself back
Mhm.
from almost that true escalation, right? How do you
Yes.
bring yourself back down?
Yeah. That's an excellent area to talk about. And it also helps our brains focus. So what you're talking about is how our limbic system in our brains, our fight or flight stress response, will get triggered by work-related or life-related situations. And we all know that feeling where you start to feel maybe anxiety in your chest, maybe a bit of shortness of breath. You can feel your increased tension, like your head kind of starts spinning and you feel overwhelmed.
And your mood changes. Just there's that complete switch of
yeah, everything.
Yeah.
Totally. So it's a switch that happens in your brain and also in your physiology and your emotions. And so I frequently take a course at the Benson Henry Institute for Mind Body Medicine at Harvard. They've actually asked me to give a lecture this year in November, which I'm so excited about.
Congratulations.
Thank you. And so the late, great Herbert Benson, the Harvard cardiologist, discovered the relaxation response. So he called it that. And what that is a wired in antidote that we have in our bodies that we can induce at will, that can, within seconds, start to counteract that fight or flight stress response. Because the fight or flight stress response, it's there for emergency situations. Like if we really have to run, get away, or we have to fight, we want that. But if it's that we've gotten some bad news about the economy, it's not a helpful response. And in fact, when we're in that response, it actually, because the emotional fear part of our brain takes over, it actually shuts down our cortex. So we can't actually make even good decisions or plan or even respond appropriately.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So what we want to do is to calm down that emotional system and the stress response and bring our executive brain function online. There's a couple of things that we can do. One is to do a daily kind of, I do it in the morning, kind of mind body practice. It can be yoga or it could be mindfulness meditation. You want to do at least 10 minutes of it if you can. And if you have a daily practice where you're inducing the relaxation response through these techniques, that'll actually really lower the baseline of your nervous system. So you'll be just way more imperturbable. Like you'll be so much more calm and steady and better able to stay in your mind when a problem hits. So that's a foundational thing. And then another thing that you can do in the moment when you start to feel overwhelmed or you're going into a really tough meeting is to take, I call them 4-6-8 breaths.
Yeah.
It's a 4-6-8 type of breath. So you breathe in through your nose for a count of 4, hold it in your chest for a count of 6, and then breathe out through your nose or mouth for a count of 8. And that prolonged exhalation, that's longer than the inhalation, that stimulates the vagus nerve and the parasympathetic nervous system. And it starts to just calm everything down and brings that cortex back online. So you can take 2 to 3 breaths. You can do that when you're feeling really overwhelmed. You can also do it, like I said, when you want to amplify your performance. I'll often do it before stepping out on a stage in order to get myself into the zone. So that's a really powerful tool that we all have.
Yeah. I've been using that one like at night. Like if
Yes.
My crew here knows, like the waking up in the middle of the night.
Yes.
That I've been using that and that does actually help.
It really helps. I do it the night before a speech. I'm just back from Toronto and I had to get up very early on the West Coast. It was like 3:30 a.m. I had to get up. And so it's hard to fall asleep. And plus I had to give a presentation, all that stuff. And so I do like 8 of them, and I actually count them off on my fingers. And I usually don't get to 8 because I'll start to fall asleep, and that because it focuses your mind away and
Nice.
regulates your nervous system.
That's a good one to think of at night, as you know, the
Yeah.
additional added value to today's conversation is for those of us that are experiencing our waking up at 3 a.m. issues.
Yeah, which can also be hormonal. So
Which we
that
it's
can
a
be low
whole other
progesterone.
topic that we
So-
have lots to say about. Let me
Yes.
tell you that. Trust us. So the only last thing I wanted to touch on, really, and ladies, you let me know if you have anything else, is, you know, what's your final thoughts or takeaways or challenges to our listeners? You know, what do you think that those little nuggets that they can do to help themselves, or, you know, you want to share with people?
I would say, in terms of a big picture, fundamental paradigm and mindset is to become really strong in what you know to be true, and to really honor that. Stop second guessing yourself. Like, know what it is you need in your life, in your day. Like, what do you really need to be at your best and to be supported? Like, foundationally, I know you can't probably get and do everything, but what are the fundamental things, and to really honor them and protect them. And also to know, especially with this no piece, and that applies personal life and professional life. I really encourage you to, again, like, quiet all the noise about what will people think? Is this bad? Will I be offensive? Will nobody like me anymore? Like, just shut all the noise and get really clear on, what do I need to do? What do I need to have in my life, personal life, professional life? What are my top priorities? And give yourself permission and use your voice and stand in it. And it's going to feel super uncomfortable, but stand strong in that truth. That's what I would want to leave everybody with.
Wow. Powerful.
It's very
Very
powerful as
powerful.
we all take that away, and, you know, get a little goosebumpy when you think about it. But I think it's a good practice, and we probably don't do it, and more so as women, and we're all
Yes.
leaders and busy moms and all of that. But I think you're right. I think it's not just your professional life. I think it's also your personal life that you need to
Yes.
do some of that integration, so to speak, because it does spill
Yes.
over, right?
Oh, 100%. And the thing is too, and that for women especially, we need to get into our minds that everybody wins. Like, when mom is in a good zone and well rested and has had a little bit of time to herself, everybody wins. And same
Yeah,
thing in the
there's-
workplace.
There's that country song. My kids always make fun of me. There's a country song that's, you know, when mama ain't happy, nobody's happy, right?
Right?
So
So it's not
that's the
selfish.
truth. That's so, yeah.
That is absolutely true.
So we're gonna link everything, obviously your book and your LinkedIn page. But one thing is, if one of our listeners comes and says, you know, where can I find Dr. Susan? Where would you like them to go?
Yes.
Sure. So my website is thriveworklive.com, and there's a complimentary 10 Essential Easy Changes ebook that you can get there. You'll see a pop-up. And also my book itself, you can find more information at theresilientlifebook.com.
Amazing.
I'm all over social too, so come find me.
Yeah.
We will link everything.
Like, just imagine that if you were able to shift those things, you're already very successful. Just imagine what is possible, not only in terms of how everything starts to feel better and more fun and easier, but you feel just better. You show up in your whole life better. There's just so much exciting potential there once you start tweaking these small things. It's really quite exciting, actually.
I can't wait.
Yeah, I definitely agree. This is my second time interacting, so I absolutely welcome a third for another episode, because we do agree. We start these conversations. We don't want to overload too much in one session, but it also expands to additional questions, thoughts, and comments. So I thank you for taking the time to meet me again and meet the rest of the team. And I am very, very grateful for you. That's for sure.
Oh, thank you so much. Just love it.
Amazing.
Thank you. Thank you for listening and watching, and we'll be back in 2 weeks. Bye, everybody.
Bye.